You know, the very title of this video is interesting to say the least. JRPGs, whether you can believe it or not, are Japanese role-playing games made from Japanese studios, so you would think all of them would try to appeal to, well, Japan. But interestingly enough, there are some JRPGs that were made to cater to the West, inspired by Western cultures, or made with the intent to be a hit internationally. Either way, JRPGs aren't being made nowadays fully with the Japanese audience in mind, but to also the rest of the world. This is mostly because if you can make a splash in the West, your game will probably enjoy a large amount of success. So here we are with 5 JRPGs that catered to the West. Remember to like this video if you enjoyed it, and of course subscribe if you are new to the channel. Enjoy. Ni no Kuni 2. Ni no Kuni 2 is a game I know a lot of people have mixed reactions about. Some people don't think it's all that great of a game, while others think it's one of the best JRPGs to be released recently. My experience with Ni no Kuni games have been mostly mixed myself. For me personally, Ni no Kuni 1 wasn't my cup of tea all that much. Ni no Kuni 2 I definitely liked a lot more, but it does have some minor problems, but ultimately I felt it was nothing worth writing home about. With Ni no Kuni though, the developers definitely made it with a Western audience in mind. In an interview with the director and CEO of Ni no Kuni 2, he had this to say. The first Ni no Kuni was very much intended for a Japanese audience, and it's kind of tendency or a trend there to play a game where you don't focus too much on the action. Right now we had a very international design in mind from the get-go, so we redesigned the combat system to be in line with that philosophy. I know that international design part can be interpreted in many different ways, but it seems their priority when making Ni no Kuni 2 was pretty much anywhere that wasn't in Japan. So much so, in fact, that the game nearly didn't see a release in Japan. The director and CEO also had this to say. At first, Ni no Kuni 2 was being developed for overseas, and there was a time where we hesitated on whether we should release a Japanese version. Ultimately, we ended up making a Japanese version with high motivation. So there you have it. Ni no Kuni 2 almost missed a release in Japan. Kinda don't blame them, as Ni no Kuni 1 sold a lot better in the States than it did in Japan, so if they were going to develop another game, why not cater to the audience that brought the game the most? Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey. Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey is a JRPG that I feel needs more exposure because of how good it actually is. I didn't play the vanilla version that was released in English in 2010, but I did play the Redux, and holy crap, Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey is such a underrated game. It needs to be ported to the Nintendo Switch along with a boatload of other DS and 3DS games, if at all possible. Anyway, Strange Journey was definitely created with the West in mind. Maybe not to cater to the West specifically, but it definitely was inspired by Western culture. If you played it for even a little bit, it's pretty much got an international cast of characters fighting to save the planet from some crazy stuff happening in Antarctica. The game was made with an overseas state of mind from the get-go, taking influences from John Carpenter's movies Escape from New York and The Thing, and also taking an influence from James Cameron's Aliens. I mean, seriously, if you're looking for a JRPG that's not your typical run-of-the-mill of might and magic deal, you don't have to look any further than Strange Journey. At one point, in what I assume was the very early stage of planning out the story, the game was supposed to be set in New York City. That would have been great for me personally, as I always question in an SMT game where humanity is being tested 9 times out of 10, why is Tokyo always the center of attention? Yeah, I get it, it's a Japanese game and people in Japan will relate better, but in the back of my head I always wondered how other places and countries were dealing with demons running amok. Strange Journey kinda answered that question in a way. But seriously, if you haven't played Strange Journey, jump on it, even if it's just for the story, because I think it's intriguing as hell. Monster Hunter World. From the very first trailer I saw of Monster Hunter World, I knew this game wasn't being developed with the Japanese fully in mind all that much. Almost everything about this game screams it was being developed to be a hit in the West, or at least have a global appeal. Which is interesting because the Monster Hunter series has always been a very niche Japanese game on PSP and other consoles that not many people know a lot about, or even cared about. That was until Monster Hunter World stepped into the spotlight. perfect. From its combat to its dialogue, presentation to the character models to its open world to even its UI, Monster Hunter World was a game that was built from the ground up to be liked by an international audience. It's interesting to note that not all of Capcom was fully on board with this approach, as they knew making a normal Monster Hunter game would yield guaranteed sales in the land of the rising sun, but teams within Capcom's international marketing felt strongly that crafting a game that appealed outside of the East would be best. And this decision was actually made for the better. Look, I know there's a lot of you that knew about Monster Hunter and was just fine where the series was pre-Monster Hunter World's release, but World has enjoyed a lot of success. I know plenty of people who weren't interested or didn't even know about Monster Hunter until this game was released. It became Capcom's highest and fastest selling Monster Hunter game to date. It was even the top selling game for 2 months straight when it released in 2018. And globally, Monster Hunter World has shipped over 13 million copies. So I would say the future of Monster Hunter games are bright. It just shows that changing things up a bit can lead to fantastic results for a previously niche franchise. Final Fantasy 13. Final Fantasy 13 is a game that I now have mixed feelings about. I know when it first launched, I was very disappointed with the game. The game really played it straight. It's like it had a one-track mind. Nowadays, I find myself wanting to replay the game just to see if it was as bad as I personally thought it was. I know there are those of you out there that enjoyed the game, and that's just fine. But Final Fantasy 13 was definitely a JRPG that had a global audience in mind. You could probably say that some of the prior Final Fantasies also had that mindset, and I wouldn't argue with you if you told me Final Fantasy 15 was in the same boat. Final Fantasy 13 had a real troubled development cycle. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the details of all that, really, that's just a separate video, but the creators were definitely keen on making a game that would appeal to the West. One of Final Fantasy 13's directors had this to say: "Even before the current generation of consoles were introduced, it was obvious that the game market in the West was gaining momentum, and we couldn't ignore it. The sentiment that stood out the most to us at the time was the increasingly harsh criticism towards JRPGs." So that proves the fact, and really not to anyone's surprise, that the focus would be to take advantage of the momentum the gaming market was getting in the West. He then went on to say, around the same time we were experimenting with Western development methods, and there were talks within the team of global focus groups, which we had rarely conducted with previous projects. At the same time, Square Enix set up an international focus group for certain titles, including Final Fantasy 13. Unfortunately, we were quite far along in development and knew it would be too late to implement most of the feedback from the player test sessions. Even so, we still signed up for the opportunity, as this will be our only chance before the game's release to see how Western players will respond to all that we have been working on. So the creators had a global mindset in mind for Final Fantasy 13, but didn't decide to get feedback from the West until the game was at a point of no return to change anything. Jesus H. Christ, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of the many troubles with this JRPG's development. Either way, I don't think it's really all that much of a surprise that Final Fantasy 13 wanted to succeed in the West. And it did its best to pull that off, and if you ask certain people, they would say it succeeded in that aspect. But if you were to ask me that very same question, my answer would be, it's a nice looking game though. Dragon's Dogma. Dragon's Dogma is a JRPG. I mean, I'm pretty sure it is. It's an RPG made in Japan, so that pretty much fits the bill, right? To be honest, I consider Dragon's Dogma as much as a JRPG as I do the Soul series, and that's not really saying all that much. Just like Monster Hunter World, you can easily tell this game was created with a Western state of mind. It's a game that tried to emulate Western RPGs like Skyrim and Fallout. In fact, one could say that Dragon's Dogma was essentially designed to be the Skyrim of JRPGs, and without a doubt created to be a hit in the West and other places before Japan. I mean, the game was released in the West before it was released in Japan. The director of Dragon's Dogma said the team was virtually trying to create their own version of Skyrim, saying that Skyrim has had a big influence on the RPG genre and that him and his team were trying to do the same. Dragon's Dogma at the time was Capcom's most ambitious project, hoping to capture that ever-growing Western gaming market just like Final Fantasy 13 did when it released. And it's questionable if they achieved that or not, but the game wasn't too bad. Well, on Xbox 360 the game was kinda littered with performance issues, but that was more or less fixed with the games released on PC. For me personally, I played the game when it first came out and I wasn't all that impressed by it. And maybe that's because it wasn't quote-unquote JRPG enough for me, but I know a lot of people who absolutely love to play Dragon's Dogma to this day. You know, I'm sure there are plenty of other JRPGs that have tried to appeal to the West. You can go ahead and tell me all about it, and maybe I'll make another video with even more JRPGs that were made with the West in mind. I don't think by any means it's a bad thing for a JRPG to be created with another territory in mind. Getting more people to play the genre can't be a bad thing, right? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, and of course subscribe if you are new to the channel. I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.